let's talk about it. I didn't have time to then discuss with you. So, how common is CKD? How many people have CKD in the US?
25%.
It's there, 30 million people. Okay, I've given it to you. So and that's why I think that all of CKD does not progress to end stage, but some of it does, and some of it does. Then you have end stage therapies like transplant or dialysis. Transplant is temporary than compared to dialysis, right? So how many people are on the wait list? 20 needing a transplant? Anybody? Even though it's immunosuppression, I'm just going to throw these questions. 100,000 every year. You add about 120,000 people on the wait list right now. There are 500,000 plus people who get dialysis done. Okay, you do about 24,000 transplants a year. It's going down. So there's always a demand and supply thing, right? So what is that? How long does kidney transplant last? I just want to ask you this, right? So how long does a disease from a transplant last?
10 to 15 years. 10 to 15 years.
10 to 15 years, depends on the statistics you use. What do you want to use? If you use average or median, it's about 8 to 10 years. If you use death sensor, half-life, when you take away death as cause of half-life, then it goes to, depending on the quality of the kidney, 12 to 16 years longer. Similar, living donor transplant. I like to use the T half-life because it really takes away death as a cause of graft loss within the first year. And then you look at it, 18 to 24 years for living donor transplant. But the point is, that is a finite thing. And we're trying to, and what keeps your transplant going, functioning, is immunosuppression. So you need to have adequate immunosuppression so that you control the response of the body, which is to reject the kidney. And this is the evolving field. Okay? Newer and newer immunosuppressants are being discovered. They have toxicities in them. You need to know how to manage them. So that's where the field of transplant is all around immunosuppression, understanding the immune response, managing the complications of immunosuppression, and that's exactly what we do in nutshell for living. And that's just to show the prevalence of ESRD that's going up. You guys should know that very well. This is something I always do in any talk. When you look at kidney failure compared to deaths, remember that it is very high. People on dialysis die. People don't realize that next to lung cancer, it is the single most highest mortality you have. And most of those patients die in the year of dialysis, actually speaking. So this is something, remember that they'll ask you this in the boards, actually, this is a good question they ask you sometimes in the boards. They'll frame it in different ways, but ESRD is not something to be taken lightly. And the importance of that is shown on the slide itself. This is how it all started. Okay? So that is the first kidney transplant at Regimen Women's Hospital. Okay? Between those twists, Herrick twins, in 1954, December 24th. It's from Harvard now. Around the same time, we started to have dialysis called, okay, and that is the original dialyzer. Have you ever seen this machine, any one of you? I have. Okay, it's in the museums. It is huge, it's big, it's like a, and after that, the machines used to be like big laundry machines, tubs. Okay, and then what you see today, this is also, so there's been evolution in both transplantation and in dialysis.
Dr. Jack, I think they are not able to see you advancing the slides.
They're not?
Oh, you might have to share the slide. Is he sharing the slide?
Yeah, he is sharing.
Huh?
Are you sharing the?
You got to share it. Okay.
The login here.
There it is.
Oh, we are sharing.
You're sharing
Okay.
it. You're sharing it.
Okay,
You're sharing it.
okay.
So they are items.
All right. That's PD, the very first patient who started on peritoneal dialysis. Just on a side of it. How many transplants have you done in the US? That's outdated figure. It's closer to now, probably 2020, about close to 450,000. Okay. We do about 20,000 kidney transplants in pancreas, about 120,000 people still waiting for transplant. About 5,000 people died. That is the thing which I am more concerned about, the fact that There are people on the wait list still dying. Okay? And again, how do you expand access to transplant? We can talk about all this stuff. But one of the things I tell you is to make sure that the existing transplants stay longer. One of the most common reasons to get a transplant is what? Okay. This is why. Okay. This is why I prefer my old-fashioned way of talking. Can everybody hear me now?
I asked Dr. Paul if you can hear him, he said
No.
you can hear him.
No, now you can hear me, right? Okay. All right, this is the history of transplant, surgically, Alexis Carroll, this anastomosis, which was discovered in 19 or something like that. I didn't know what it was. I've started the process, the surgical thing, and it was Peter Nagauer. This is where immunosuppression comes in. And he was an agricultural scientist working in England in the war years. And everybody knows this. Okay, the first set response, the second set, third set. Everybody who's done immunology knows this better. And so basically, this is key. All he took was 2 rats, different kind of rats, the skin of the rat, put a patch on it, injected within 8 days. Then again, injected within 3 days. He did the same experiment. What he did is the rats were transplanted, took the serum from the rats, injected into the rat which is going to put the transplant, did the transplant. He didn't take 8 days, 3 days. So he said there's something in the serum. We know what it is now, antibodies. And that is where the very elegant set of experiments in the 1940s framed the immune response. Even before you found about T cells, about antibodies, and everything, you got to realize how important landmark this discovery was. And then this is what framed the immune response for the next 50 years. And by the force of his personality, this man, and it was basically, he was a big proponent of the T cell, that was cell-mediated immunity, even, and that is why we didn't even look at antibody-mediated responses to dose injection, not because of this man who got a Nobel Prize later and all this stuff he was making that. So this is something which I think that all people in nephrology and transplants need to know. This is where it started. Understanding the immune response, what it was. But that we didn't have to understand it fully because the first kidney transplant was between identical twins. It was a success. And the next 18 series were between, again, living donor transplants on either side of the Atlantic. So after that, between 1954 and 1960, they kept on doing these transplants successfully. But all the deceased children, all the transplants to the deceased donor are not between identical twins, failed miserably. They never survived beyond a few days or a few months. And there was a reason for that, is because the rejection. We did not understand the immune response. We did not know that why the kidney was being rejected, or that they knew that it was being rejected, and we did not have the necessary therapeutics to prevent the rejection. Well, in addition to that, to understand the immune response, we needed to know why self or non-self. That self and non-self theory was first illustrated by Peter Burnett. Go back into immunology, you look back long back, said that's the reason why we tend to reject, and this theory of self and non-self illustrated, but it was given a more concrete shape by Jean Dosset, who discovered the human leukocyte antigen. Initially, it was from a mouse, and HLA was And this is on chromosome, short term of chromosome 6. And basically you've got class 1 and class 2. Class 1 is A, B, and C. I'm not going to put the difference. Class 2 is D, B, D, R. You could argue which is more important. Okay, people will tell you that class 2 differences are more important in causing rejection than class 1, but both are equally important, I feel. But there's certain variations are there in terms of chronic rejection and antibody rejection. So they ask you for your boards, of course, the class 2 are more important. Does it matter? Yeah, it does. If you look at HLA and matching pair survival, of course, if you have better match or less matches, you have better survival. In terms of immunosuppression, this is where it all started. Peter Starzl, who's the transplant surgeon, Roy Crown, the surgeon on the other side of the Atlantic, and this Ilion Hutchings. And what they discovered was azothioprine, working for cancer laboratories. They did not discover it for treating transplant rejection, they discovered it for treating acute lymphatic leukemia. And it was a great success because ALL used to have 100% mortality rate then. But that was used by these gentlemen here, and this is the landmark actually, the way they proposed the paper, steroids plus azothioprine. And that heralded the start of immunosuppression transplantation. You could do disease donor transplant, and the 1-year death survival was close to 50%. So that is the first combination of immunosuppression. Since then, we have gone a long way. Okay, so they tried radiation before. You came in the 60s. You had your antigen-presenting globulins. Then they discovered in the 80s cyclosporine. Later on 90s, you have tacrolimus, both the calcium inhibitors. Then mycophenolate came when I was starting to do my fellowship. Now you know how old I am now. Okay. And then you have the monoclonal antibodies, glycemia, which you use. You can see there, Campat came much later, and rapamycin, rapamycin came. And then, of course, you got the ladder-cert on the block. Typically, at the same time, the other advances. But again, you can see that this is involved in the field. I want to show you this along with that in context with this. Okay, the green is 1-year survival, and these are the rejection rates. As we are discovering newer and newer methods to immunosuppress and control response, we are doing a better job of it. Dr. Paul showed you this slide before. I'm not going to go in it. Basically, immune response is divided into signal 1, signal 2, signal 3, and signal 4 apoptosis. Classically, is the 3-signal response. So basically, an antigen presenting cell, the kidney is the antigen. Yes?
Sorry, they're having problems seeing this.
I think you have to share the screen, the slideshow. How do you do that?
Why are you letting
Do you have any animations on your slide?
Oh, not any animation.
Then can we just keep it on the regular
I have
view?
no animation slides.
Yeah, just keep it on this view.
See if they can.
All right. Unless they can see it and hear it, I'm not progressing. I'm just going to talk here. People are not sure they can't hear it.
Just do it in the presenter view. Don't do the slideshow view.
The other screen? Press ask that, Dr.
That's what? Ask.
Yeah, just do on this view.
And you just go down like this.
Okay, that's fine. I can do that. Can they see?
Yeah, this they can see.
They can see. All right. Okay, you don't need to know all that stuff. I was talking about history and geography, not needed. So let's do it. But you can, that's an interesting part of it. I think we will list out. So if you look at it, Dr. Paul talked about the 3-signal model, right? So kidney antigen, the T cells presented. Okay, your immune system, if the recipient recognizes the foreign, okay, the T cell antigen interaction happens. Then there's co-stimulation which occurs. I told you a couple of molecules, T cell CD28. And then after that, you have your T cell gets activated. Basically, you have influx of calcium, and then your activated T cells go there, and then they start turning on IL-2s, and then you have effector response, which is the cytotoxic T cells, and they damage the tract. Okay, so basically, if you look at it, those are the 3 things, right? So you can interfere anywhere. So the best way to stop it is have twins. or have cloned people, right? You don't need immunosuppression. Or do a bone marrow stem cell transplant and then do a kidney transplant. We do sometimes multiple myeloma patients and they don't need immunosuppression. They need very little immunosuppression. Probably not all like the last 20 years that. So then we have to work at either we have to look at some kind of antibodies to take care of wipe out your T cells induction, which is wipe it out right to the get go cell. We look at working on the NFAT mechanisms. We have calcium inhibitors, we'll go through it more. Or we look at IL-2, you can target with antibodies. Or your anti-metabolites there, because all your cytotoxic T cells, they need to multiply. So if you have an anti-metabolite, it targets DNA synthesis, whether it's imuran or pyrimidine thickness, you can work there. And then steroids work in a very pleiotropic fashion. It's an anti-inflammatory molecule, it's immunosuppressive, it's IL-2, it inhibits, a lot of things it does. So you have to have a mechanism where it affects all the T cells. So remember, the immune system is it's like a balloon filled with water, small pinpricks everywhere. You cannot put a band-aid everywhere in the immune system. You can target a specific thing. If you target very proximally, you're going to die of infectious cancer. If you do distally, you don't have too many target points. So at best, what we do in immunosuppression is we suppress the immune response enough to have the kidney survive. And slowly, that's why in most transplants, the kidney function slowly gets worse unless tolerance builds. So the other part of the thing is some of the regimens are more tolerogenic. What happens is in some patients, they tend to develop peripheral tolerance. You cannot get central tolerance. Central tolerance is only when you get a stem cell transplant, things like that. So peripheral tolerance, the level of the liver, the spleen, and what you can get that happening. So some patients will sustain it for a long period of time. But for most patients, it's just a question of keeping it in bay, and that's what immunosuppression does. And it's a question of always balancing out the side effects of it versus what you're getting. So you've got to have this golden mean. The idea is not to completely abrogate the immune response. If you do that, you're going to have death. What are the side effects of immunosuppression? Malignancies, infection, and cardiovascular mortality and morbidity. So you're going to get that. So the idea is it's kind of a balance, and depends on what time of the patient post-transplant is there, you adjust it because your propensity to reject slowly decreases over time. So this is another thing which shows what happens after how events following T cell activation, right? So immediately, if you don't do a cross match, like Dr. Paul said, you can have a hyperactive rejection. That never happens. I haven't seen one for a long time. This is where the lymphocytes are made and make cytokines. This is exactly where the highly sensitized patient right after the transplants start to get a rejection. And that's why you do design induction regimen here. As it goes by 3 to 4 days and you start your maintenance regimen, you suppress it, and after that, a week or 2 weeks later, pretty much everything is set. Then the question of non-compliance. After 1 month or so, it's more and more question of patients not taking the medication or events which will trigger it off, like an infection, which increases IL-2 and things like that. So that other events which happen. So as it happens, things changes. So, and this is not something I like. I like it just to show you all the immunosuppressants that are there. The reason why I like it is not a mechanistic way of looking at it. It's a way of this classification, and I hate classification. But steroids, calcium inhibitors, target of rapamycin inhibitors, sirolimus, everolimus, the anti-metabolites, which we use are microphenolate and myfortic, and cyclophosphamide is an old one. We don't use it anymore. FDY, sulfate, that's found by the wayside. In that, most of the antibodies are used for either rejection or induction. Thimerosal is what you guys see. Bacilliximab is against IL-2. Campat is against CD52. Rituximab is used to take rejection. So also as a decent technique is anti-CD20, OKD3 against CD3, post-stimulatory blockade, the rilatacept. Complement inhibitors, sometimes people are using glycemia, and these are investigational things. And phototherapies there, which are not mentioned, stem cell transplantation is not just for completion's sake. So as time has gone by, when I was a fellow, I started out with thermal induction, my patients had, cyclosporine, imuran, and prednisone. As my fellowship progressed, it moved to tacrolimus, mycophenolate, prednisone, and thimerosal was still there. And became a young faculty, IL-2 inhibitors came, basiliximab started to come for the low-risk thing, and that was there. The next thing was mycophenolate. Okay, we started to get immunos completely replaced for maintenance. And then as time went by, now we have the newest thing is belatacept and belatacept. So the last 10 years, 12 years or so, or longer than that, I think, the single most important advance in immunosuppression has been belatacept. And probably the use of anti-B-cell therapies, which is gaining more and more popularity. But that's okay. Now you look at 90% of the programs in the world are tacrolimus, mycophenolate, plus minus prednisone based. Induction is mainly thymoglobulin based. Some places may use Campac. Okay, there's some advantages with a few places. People still use that, and that is the most. So it's easier for you now. Because when I was there were multiplicity of regimens and stuff. Now it's very easy. It's exactly what you want to use in most places. Steroids. Now, I'm not going to talk about it. I'm going to tell you that steroids is all the side effects of it, right? I don't have to tell you. But why do we still give it? We still need steroids because our patients, many of our patients, have got a high proclivity to reject. Okay? So when we started immunosuppression, started transplantation in the 70s and 80s, everybody needed steroids. Then we saw those in the 90s, there were papers produced that people were having all these side effects, especially the pediatric. So the initial trials for steroid withdrawal and steroid avoidance came from the pediatric. A lot of the stimulus came from that. And the early trials failed. The early trials failed because we didn't have good immunosuppression. So the early trials, you look at the 80s, the steroid withdrawal and avoidance trials, the patients did not do well, they rejected a lot. The later trials, which I call the trials between probably 1990 and 2000, those trials when you had tacrolimus especially and induction therapy at the time of globulin, they chose the patients. So the trials which you chose the patients well, you found out that the patients did well with steroid avoidance / withdrawal. Avoidance means you don't give it at all. Okay. Withdrawal means within probably 3 months you withdraw it. Now, not everybody can do that. Like we are a steroid withdrawal center. Probably about 40% of our patients are there. But you look at the patients who cannot get it. Now, I'll come to that. So they may ask you this: what are the factors which will make you choose a steroid withdrawal avoidance regimen versus putting the patients on steroids? But still, it's an integral part of your treatment for rejection. It's an integral part of many of your patients who need to have steroids. In the pediatric age group, it's even more important because they do have delayed growth. They have a lot of other issues. Personality changes, going to school, a lot of things. The other ones I'm not going to talk about the side of this thing. So, the shifting paradigm now. So, African Americans tend to do worse. If you have borderline kidney function at the get-go, they do worse. If you have acute rejection the first year or initiate the transplant, obviously a multi-organ transplant or your recurrent disease with steroids. If you transplant across the immunological barrier, across immune compatibility or DS6 are there, that you need to have steroids. Patients who are tacrolimus and rapamune or have induction regimen, they tend to do well with those clinical trials. But you got to do it within 3 months. For some reason, you don't know why, late withdrawals don't do well. Okay, late withdrawals, people tell you the body gets used to it. I don't believe that. Okay, but I will tell you this: that after 6 months, if you do late withdrawal, the benefits are not there. But the benefits are what? Mainly cardiovascular, endocrine, metabolic benefits. Those benefits in all clinical trials are usually there when you do it in 6 months. Okay, so, and again, some patients will always need to be on steroids. And if you look at the last part of the study, the same person like that. For example, Steve Woodall has done most of the studies on a lot of the studies on steroid withdrawal. If you look at his 2000 studies, he's a big proponent of it. And we look at the later studies, he's backed off in his own thing, saying that no patient need to be on steroids. So we have come to the conclusion that some patients will always need to be on steroids. So you have to make it, you go with the algorithm, but then they have a subclinical rejection on your 3-month biopsy, put them back on steroids. That's where we need to be more careful about it. That we cannot, it's okay, but we have to, immunosuppression is something that is constantly dynamic and evolving.
I think your board question, don't choose steroid withdrawal.
Yeah.
Again and again, I have seen a few board questions, even I think in FSAP or whatever. don't choose steroid withdrawal for any answer.
Because we have evolved. We thought it was going to be okay. I did a couple of, and I think that
Dr. Jha, do you think it depends on the induction?
it does depend. But I will tell you that we initially thought African Americans could not do it. When I was in Augusta in 2004, so at that time I initiated steroid withdrawal aggressively in African Americans also. I said that's BS, let's do it. By the time I was leaving, I was looking at my own data. A lot of these patients having chronic rejection and coming back for late biopsies. And I wish I'd published. So I was wrong. I was very aggressive for the right reasons, because at that time that was the mantra.
So if you have someone who was on no steroid maintenance and maybe 4 or 5 months after transplant has a 1A rejection, and you treat the patient with steroids, are you going to keep him on steroids after that forever?
I think we know this. Okay, and this is Hariana's data from before, and we'll go back to that, and because you're going to get often rejection. One rejection, mild rejection, the first plate does not affect your long-term graft survival. More than one rejection does. His data shows that, Hariana's data shows that. But I tend to believe that if you have a rejection despite adequate immunosuppression, that means that anti-metabolite and technology levels are okay, and the patient still rejected, I think that they're telling you something. And I think being on 5 milligram, you weigh the risk and the benefit of it. And I think that, basically, let's say they had, if they were compliant, everything was fine, I think I would put them on a small dose of that. So that's my sense of it, because I have evolved with that. I used to be very aggressive for steroid withdrawal. We all got our fingers burnt in that. Many of us do. So I evolved that. Not everybody. So how many of our patients go back on steroids? That's a very good question. So we'll say 40% of patients, let's say, are not on steroids after the transplant, 3 months. About a good 50% of them go back on steroids. So the end result is not everybody's. So about 20-25% stay off steroids. That's the real number actually. The next would be cyclosporine and hydrogens. You know this. I think Dr. Paul showed you that it binds to basically 2 molecules. Hydrogens binds to a molecule of FKB binding protein 12. And can you tell me which other immunosuppressant binds to a molecule called FKB binding protein? Have one of you?
Sorry, I said that.
Okay.
Steroids.
Very good, Steroids. We love that. I'm getting older. So basically, this binds to cyclophilin, to this protein, and what it does inhibit is the fact that T cell, if you inhibit that, it will not translocate from the cytosol nucleus, and if it doesn't do that, it will not turn on the promoter gene for IL-2, which is the gene, which is the primary cytokine, drives cell, the G1 to S6 in our cells. So that's exactly how it acts here, inhibit T cell proliferation effector response. So I'm going to throw you a question. In the long run, do you think calcium inhibitors promote tolerance or do not promote tolerance? This is a question, may not be for second year fellows. Let me put it the other way. Do you think there's any disadvantage there? Tacrolimus is a very potent immunosuppressant. But do you think it's all good, or there's something not so good immunologically?
It's going to affect the Tregs also, if that's what you're meaning.
Yes,
So
yes. At least the theoretical thing is that it affects all lymphocytes. So Tregs are the subtype of lymphocytes which actually induce tolerance. Okay. So as you go by, and this is the whole thing that we should try to convert them to a rapamune-based target or rapamune inhibitors that actually immunological basis. One thing for that is so again. There are publications on that, but the reason I'm asking this is a board question. Yes, and I was researching that board question. So that's the only reason I'm telling you.
So Dr. Jack, is it safe to say that tolerance may be the best immunosuppression for a
the
patient?
holy grail.
Oh no, that immunosuppression without immunosuppression is the holy grail of transplanters.
So tolerance is
So
a good
if you
goal
really
to.
want tolerance, and that's a different talk on it. And like I told you, you can do steps. There's central tolerance. There's peripheral tolerance. What is central tolerance? An example. Okay, if you do in utero heart transplant on a child, that's central tolerance. Has it been done? Yeah. When you have congenital heart diseases, when you find it out in a baby, you can actually do in utero heart transplant. That's been done. And it actually, when I was there, they did it in a baby. They're never going to get rejection because the immune system is going to be the same, right? I mean, it's still under development. The other way to look at it is stem cell transplant. Multiple patients get renal failure. This is how it started. You wipe out the bone marrow, you give the stem cells from that donor, and 4 weeks later, transplant the kidney. Now, what's going to happen is it's going to accept it because 90+% of your bone marrow is the donor bone marrow. So that is a level of central tolerance which develops. Thymus implants have been used in animal models to show that you can do that. But practically speaking, tolerance is peripheral. Okay, it's peripheral because the liver is tolerant because what changes which happen in the liver and the spleen, also the bone marrow itself. Your CD4 cells, the ratio of the cells changes, the injection. So this is a very good area of research. Everybody wants to use tolerogenic regimens. People try different induction regimens, different immunosuppressants, do facts analysis, keep on looking at it. Our boss, former boss, Dr. Sudhandaran, is put in next. This is what they live. I mean, there's a big immune tolerance network being funded by NIH for 20+ years. And this is all they do, trials on tolerance. We are not there. Okay, we're not there. But it's yes, we want to be there. Then we want to give the least number of immunosuppressive agents at the lowest number of doses so that the kidney functions stable. So cyclosporine was first discovered by this Swiss scientist called Jean Borel from a fungus. Charles Leclerc used it, improved 1 year gas out to 80%. He started transplanting other organs on a practical basis after that. Most centers have switched to tacrolimus. I'm not going to mention the levels, I just put that. The only thing I'll tell you on a practical basis, the patient is coming on PO cyclosporine. You want to switch to IV cyclosporine. All you do is the cumulative dose, divide by a third. You can give it a 24-hour infusion or as a 6-hour infusion. The levels are going to be median level. Remember that, it's not no peak and troughs. So that's a very practical level. Rest of the stuff, that if there's a patient, the new transplant, there's one patient who's on cyclo right now, the newest one, the transplant is on cyclosporine. You want to run your levels between, let's say, 250 to 300 the first 6 months. I used to run them at 400 before. That's all it come down now. After 6 to 12 months, you want to drop it down further. Okay, maybe 200, 250, and after a year, you want to drop it down. So we tended to run the levels higher because the clinical trials told us to run that. When the initial landmark trials on cyclosporine as immunosuppressant came, tacrolimus came, what were we were running for tacrolimus 10 to 15 the first 6 months. And then 8 to 12 in the 6 to 12 months. And then it came down. But that was what the clinical trials were doing. And then we extrapolated and the toxicities came and we found out that lower levels were okay. So this is also very institution specific, attending specific, but that's why it's a rate. And cyclo is pharmacokinetic specific. That has got more levels which predictive. Cyclo goes up and down. That's what the earliest form of cyclosporine was not very bioavailable. And then the microemulsified form came, which is called now, which you are Gengraph or whatever you are. So remember, some of them, the Stand Immune, that's an older formulation that is not absorbed very well. Some of the clinical, when they did the clinical trial, one of the things cyclosporine always would tell these guys would say, you did this many of the clinical trials, the older version of cyclosporine, that's not fair. Side effects, this is common for both cyclo and many of them, you guys know that. So what are the side effects of calcium inhibitors? I'm going to skip the slide completely because I'm going to let you down. I'm not going to talk about that side effects. What are the side effects of calcium inhibitors? Hypertension, okay. What else? Hyperglycemia. Which one causes more? Tacrolimus or cyclosporine? Cyclosporine. Do you know the percentage? Well, actually, tacrolimus causes more. Okay, 15 to 20% is 10 to 5. So, but anyway, that's what else. What are the renal side effects? Let's go on to what are the kidney side effects? Because nephrologists will love kidneys, right? Elevates the creatinine how?
But that's a constriction.
Constriction of what? What?
Afferent
Afferent arterioles. Very good. How does it do that?
With what is it? Nitric oxidase. It has an inhibitory effect on the enzyme oxidase, nitric
There's
oxidase.
no nitric oxidase.
I forgot the name of it.
Nitric oxide synthase.
It's nitric oxidase.
And what does nitric oxide do? Very good. What are the other renal side effects?
The other renal side
Fibrosis.
effects,
Huh?
fibrosis.
Acute.
Because generally C9s can cause fibrosis.
No, I'm not talking about that. Acute.
Electrolytes.
Hypomagnesemia.
How does it cause hypomagnesemia?
Triple-Cs.
Very good.
What was that?
What else? What is the most common side effect? Right. You see all the time, you guys keep on ordering stuff, bunch of stuff.
Hyperkalemia.
Hyperkalemia. Thank you very much. What are the other? What are the acid-base disorder you see in tacrolimus? No, acid-base disorder. What's your bicarb? What can give you a bicarbonate? A type 4 RTA, right? Now we can go there. Okay. So TTP, you missed one more renal side effect from what I dropped of PhD, right? So other stuff is like this, the ones we left out are dyslipidemia, osteoporosis, hyperuricemia, cyclosporine causes more of that, cosmetic, hair growth, gingival hyperplasia. Right?
Hair growth with
Cyclosporine.
hair loss.
Hair loss. So tacrolimus will cause hair loss, cyclosporine causes hair growth.
Acropos is loss.
Yeah.
And
Most
all
common.
patients will have
Women will come and
fillings,
say they have
acne.
Yeah, this is the most common thing. Okay. Well, but nowadays it's all separate. Tacrolimus is a cancer inhibitor of choice. Why do we use cyclosporine? Because of the clinical landmark trials show decreased acute rejection rates, mainly in African Americans. And but diabetes definitely is there. Hypertension, lipids, and steroid requirement are less. Nephrotoxin, neurotoxin, almost the same. So, I talked about the hair loss, everything else same. By the way, the fibrosis, you talked about why do you get fibrosis?
It's chronic ischemia, right?
Ischemia? Okay.
Well, that's one of the pathways. It's
Okay.
not, there's multiple.
I'll grant it to you. I'll grant it. What else?
There's,
It's there in the paper that you
yeah, I know,
print out.
Dr. Shagar to make sure I
Yes.
know.
But finish this talk. Come on.
I don't mess those, he's
I don't
just
mess-
staying quiet.
Anybody? Shazad?
Cyclosporine after toxic, so.
Oh,
This was the molecule of my fellowship. TGF-beta.
TGF-beta.
TGF-beta. Okay, that was the molecule which made out of the papers are published of that.
The question was why, because of
How?
fibrosis.
Yeah.
So I think it has to do with the immunity, right? Because I mean, in general, what happens is that it's B cells. I mean, essentially, I think it has to do with the fact that there's some aspect of the immune system that are not affected. I mean, it starts suppressing it, and therefore you get this chronic fibrosis.
No. If the chronic rejection is a lake fed by many streams,
Yeah.
okay, this is one part, okay. We're talking about an alloimmune response which is continually going, driven by antibodies, which causes. That's the immune part of it, right? The non-immune part of the drivers of this is one of the things is calcium inhibitors, hypertension, diabetes, recurrent disease, the whole loss of it. So it combines together and this happens. So when that is driven by TGF beta, PDGF, a couple of side effects, TGF beta being the major one. So we are now using more tacrolimus than calcinide as a total that.
So for CNI, the most common questions you'll have will be side effects for sure and interactions with other medications
So
on the cytochrome inhibitor.
you're going to tell me all the interactions because the blanks are coming. Okay, I'm not going to put that. Immuran. You're not going to use it a whole lot, but you use it in GM. Okay, in transplant. We use it when we cannot use mycophenolate because it's substitute. Because and I'll tell you the common side effects of mycophenolate and why we use it. So this was, how did it work? Right? I bring it up. It's a purine antagonist, right? Okay, what purine is not converted to what? I didn't mention it. AT or GC? Both? I don't remember. Both, right?
Good question.
So remember the one thing you need to remember. Forget all that. Then nobody is going to ask you how it is. It inhibits the phospholipid transferase, the pathway, okay? Both the salivate and de novo pathway. If you want to go back to actual mechanics of it, that's what it does. What they're going to ask you is the effect, side effects are skin cancer, myelosuppression, hepatotoxicity, pancreatitis, all these are the ones you asked. But the interaction with the other immunosuppressants. Basically, if you're going to give this and what else? That's a standard classic dosage. You can use dosage. This is going to be the only board question. And skin cancer, which is common with immunosuppression. Other than that, I don't think they're going to ask you any board question on that. The only time when we use it, like I told you, is to conversion regimens, we cannot use mycophenolate. Okay. Yes, let me ask you a question. Do you think Imuran is as efficacious as mycophenolate in long term?
Based on the
That's
slide,
unfair
yes.
Actually, yes. So recent data, the last 10 years to come, after a year, do a conversion, clinical data, either on cyclosporine based implements or on tacrolimus based implements. After stable patients, you convert stable, you convert them, they graft survival and outcomes. So actually, why is this important to me is it's a cheaper medication. A country like India, especially, we do that in India quite a bit. People cannot afford it, we switch them to Imuran. That doesn't mean that they're going to get worse outcomes. Stable patients are free where you can consider switching, especially some of our patients do not have insurance and stuff like that.
So what's the limitation for the conversion? Is it the side effect of the?
No, if I have money, why should I go by Benz instead of going by non-neon, right? Yeah, the side effect, sure, absolutely. So mycophenolate is going to, I did the clinical trials, what is the, we'll come to mycophenolate, I'll tell you why we use mycophenolate based on what clinical trial. So remember that this inhibits, it's what, monophosphate dehydrogenase, so guanosine does not get formed, okay? So that's what it is. It's a reversible interaction. There are two isoforms of the enzyme, 1 and 2. But that's what you need to remember in mycophenolate. It comes in two variations, cell set, and then there's the extra, which is there, mycophenolic acid, which is there, which is supposedly more GI friendly, which you use for it. But that's post-marketing studies. I don't believe it. That's what it is. Okay. If you ask me as an immunologist scientist, no, it's all post-marketing. But until 1990s by Hans Soliker, what happened in the initial trial? There are 3 large trials: one Europe, one US, one tricontinental. Regardless of all the trials, thousands of patients showed that cyclo-imuran bread compared to cyclo-mycophenolate bread, 1 year reduction rates dropped from 35% to 18% around the world, depending on the study. So when that results came out, they said, we have conquered rejection and chronic rejection. So they said, no, you're not going to have any more chronic rejection. Guess what happened with the 3 and the 5 and the 10-year data? But the 1-year data is the reason why we made the switch. And in all the studies, the African Americans did better. African Americans are more immunogenic. So that's the reason we went from mycophenolate. Based on those strength of those clinical studies, we made the decision. Do we have any therapeutic levels for it? Yeah, there are mycophenolate levels which can be done. Okay, you can send it. There are a lot of people who send it in some centers. There is no validation of that. There are not too many studies. There are 3 or 4 studies which have been done. Some are supportive of it, some are not supportive of it, some are like it. The level of evidence is not good. So that's why we do not do it. I do it as a practical issue when people are getting a lot of infections and I need targeted some very individual patients. I send them this. Very individual patients. I mean, very few. Maybe I really don't. And that's not advocated also.
So how do you dose
The dose, based on clinical trials, right? So the clinical trials tell you that for African Americans, a mycophenolic acid, 720 milligram PID, translates to 1 gram of cell set. Right? Okay, that's based on for Caucasians bring lower down. The initial trials told you it should be 1.5 grams twice daily for cell set, which translates to 1040 milligrams of metformin twice a day. That is the initial clinical trial for African Americans. And for Caucasians, it's 1 gram of cell set BID or 720 BID of that. But that was then, you realize that that's too much. Okay, so we have all come down. For now, we make it for African Americans, 720 BID of microfilmic acid or 1 gram BID. For Caucasians and other races, we drop it half, 360 twice a day is more than sufficient, or self-sufficing BID. There is a fixed drug thing.
So then I've seen people on 180 BID.
That's because of the side effects, or maybe the white count is low. They've got GI side effects, or we'll go into the side effects. So mainly, what are the main side effects? Myelosuppression, GI side effects, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, infections, CMV, BK, whatever it is, malignancies like skin cancer. Anytime you have that, you want to cut it back or stop it or substitute it or one of those things, right? So that's the reason we do it. The important thing which we forget sometimes, and you guys should not forget it, when you reduce the dosage for whatever reason, you're going to go back and increase it to a reason. So let's say somebody had BK virus and you stop the microfilm plate, the BK virus disappeared. And the question is, when did we restart it? How much did we restart? That's a question that's the thing which we discuss all the time. Maybe 3 months later when things are negative, we started the original dosage of 720 BID. Guess what? Let's start at 180, go 360, that may be enough. See, immunosuppression, it's not in a science also. It's kind of a thing, it's a pendulum, it goes up and down. Try to make it not do this. Try to just do this one. That's the whole thing of doing transplants, right? So, yes. So this one, it's based on fixed drug things, based on clinical trials, but also based on an individual patient.
My corset is still BID despite it being slow release.
Yeah. It is, okay, and the first thing when CellCept came, it could give it 4 times a day or twice a day. That's how we started the whole clinical trial. It was 4 times a day. Then this one is twice daily. Yeah, it's a slow release. It is, you're right, but it's twice a day. But you can, but then CellCept in the first time came 4 times a day. Most of our patients used to put them on, let's say 500 twice, 4 times a day. That's 2 grams, okay? Or 3 grams would be 750. So then we said we could do it twice a day. The trials came. So it's evolving thing. Regimen. It gave immunosuppression actually a bad name. Can I just do that? I'll tell you why. When it first came in, I was on all the 3 landmark trials. I was a PI on that, my center. We thought, what are the main problem with calcium inhibitors? Nephrotoxicity, the fibrosis, the fact that the kidneys are going to have chronic infection. So somebody wanted a immunosuppressant which is not as nephrotoxic. So they landed upon this patient, and it binds to the mammalian target of rapamycin. Inhibits T1 to S phase. It goes to a different pathway, the MAP kinase pathway. Another pathway which goes through that. You look at it, it's the entire pathway, the MAP kinase pathway. When it came into clinical trials, we thought that these patients would have better kidney function, better outcomes. But that did not happen in the very mild improvement was there. The side effect profile was really bad. What are the main side effects of Regimen? Anybody? Infection. Everything has got infection. That's easy. That's why I take nausea, vomiting, diarrhea for any antibiotic. Wound healing, very good. This is something which is not there. That is why it is not a good de novo immunosuppressant. That's why most programs cannot stop the patient on because your surgeon cuts it open, and the next thing you'll have a wound vac, even if you didn't put a wound vac in the first place. Okay. So I think that's one of the things. What else? Let's say if I'm a patient who's got a history of heart attack or cardiovascular morbidity is high, what are the other side effects are they thinking about?
Restenosis of,
No, actually.
because they use it on stents, right?
Very good. Actually use it for stents as a water. But what are the things, what are the side effects which are bad from a cardiovascular point? Absolutely. Dyslipidemia drives it through the roof. What else? You saw those patients? You took care of that particular patient. I'm not going to mention the patient's name. For a very brief time, he was on that particular medication. Your favorite patient. He used to confuse your name with his granddaughter's name.
Oh, yeah.
He never gets
No, I knew you were alluding to that, but a symptom that he had, or a side effect that he had,
Yeah.
there's no cognitive, okay.
What? Penile edema, you're worried about it,
Okay,
remember that? Okay, so penile edema is a common,
Now we won't
Okay.
forget it.
two things to remember, which apart from all this, okay? Pneumonitis. Now and then you get pneumonitis, which can land them in the ICU, on ventilators, and I've seen at least 3 patients in my life do that, okay? So be careful, anytime you start a patient with Rapamune and they start to feel short of breath, get an X-ray, see interstitial, it's the infiltrates instead. So that interstitial pneumonitis can occur. Hepatitis, I've seen that occur. Is it as really friendly to the kidney? What do you think? Does it have any kidney issues? I mean, we all think because less nephrotoxic is why we say we should use it. But is it really less nephrotoxic? What are the kidney issues it can cause? Does it have any nephrotoxicity at all? It does. Acute intestinal really, I mean, I've seen quite a few of that. TMA. In fact, you look at the hematology literature, Rapamune has got the highest instance of TMA compared to any of the even castoreons. But that's a flaw. The design of the publication is a little bit different because they looked at patients who got converted from DAC to Cyclo to Rapa when they have TMA. So I have a little bit there, but the landmark article in hematology, if you look at it, actually that big case series, Rapa has got #1 thing. If you ask hematologists, that's what they'll tell you. So it is not as benign a medication as what you guys think it is in terms of kidney.
And proteinuria.
Proteinuria, yeah.
And propensity for like lymphedema, I mean, seromas and all those things.
The wound leak is, that's how the wound leak is. So the question now is, where do you use it? So you can't use an induction in your home. Use for conversion sometimes. When you know you're having this slowly creeping creatinine, which you call, biopsy shows chronic rejection, there's some group of patients which will benefit, i.e. who have less protein in the urine, less than a gram, GFR is more than 50 ml, do not have dyslipidemia, put all those things together, you can attempt a conversion. And you can convert. The second time place where conversion is important, where do you convert patients? One more. That's a board question, actually. Skin, very good. Clinical data is there, but because sirolimus is used to treat cancers, remember that. It's an anti-proliferative effect is used to. What cancer does it treat other than skin cancer? What else can you treat? You're a nephrologist.
Kidney cancer.
Very good. We know some cancer. What else?
Geo, yeah.
We know lymphomas, lung cancer. The whole thing has kept on increasing. So it's used. They visit the oncology guys more than they visit us now. Okay, so they sell that thing. So they use everolimus. They don't use this. They use everolimus. It's a container of it. So when a patient has skin cancer, this is what you do. And then they may ask in a different flavor the same question in your boards. Levels 10 to 15. The initial Tino regimen or 5 to 10 after that. Okay.
And how do you do the conversion? Do you cross over or you just,
Oh no, I cross over.
you cross over?
Definitely, because sirolimus has got a long half-life beyond 24 plus hours. So basically, you cross over, after 3 days, you take the level and you can stop on it. If you're going to cross over cyclosporine, remember that sirolimus will bring down the levels of cyclosporine. So, the interaction with that. Well, that just to show that we don't use it more that often. Induction agents. So, hemoglobin, used, you guys all know that it's a polyclonal antibody derived from
Horses, rabbits, or horses.
this one, rabbits. Okay, then there is a monoclonal antibody in CD3, okay, which you don't use anymore, I don't think it's available. CAPPAT is another degree in CD52, and then you have your anti-IL-2, similar transgenic packs. The difference is basically between what they target, the variable portion or the hypervariable portion. Both are chimeric, it's made from mouse-based thing, but one has got more human, it's got a little bit more of mouse, that's all the difference. Xenobax has got a little bit more of mouse than this. So this is where they all target this thing. So you need to know what Thymo a lot, because Thymo is what you use a lot for rejection and also for, he's going to talk about rejection. The dosing is 1 to 1.5 milligram per kilogram body weight. You use it for about up to 5 to 6 milligram cumulatively over 3 to 5 days for induction or for rejection. Okay. Side effects are shakes and bakes, It's called the cytokine release syndrome. So you tell the patient you have fever, arthritis, bone pain, all that stuff. That's why you call shakes and things. And myelosuppression. In fact, your lymphocyte needs to drop. So what we do to target the adequate dose, your differential and lymphocyte should be less than 3% per month. Definitely needs to be there. So actually, so the white count will drop, the platelets will drop, hemoglobin will not drop. The surgeons will tell you the hemoglobin drops. No, because hemoglobin has got a half-life of 120 days. You got to do a lot of hemoglobin.
The drop is from
It's not
surgery.
going to happen. Obviously,
Yeah,
so-
no, never the surgery.
The
Never the
blood,
surgery.
the blood loss.
Yeah, it's
never
not a
the
surgery.
surgery.
It's only
In
the
the-
so and infections. So the thing that both will ask you is infections is EBV, CMV, and thymo. Okay. Every time you start somebody on thymo injection, you gotta get the prophylaxis member. And since he's going to talk about injection, I think she's going to talk about infection. She should talk about the prophylaxis. I'm going to talk about the prophylaxis part of it. PTLD, thymo. Okay. Very important. IL-2 inhibitors are like water. we used to call them what?
Holy water.
It's just like,
Holy water.
if you're doing little side effects of the infection and the stuff, there's really not much of a side effect. So it's not much to talk about there, actually. Don't use it anymore. So in terms of induction agents, you have Similac, you have the horse one called Minnesota anti-lymphocyte globulin, and you have this, which is the best one in terms of study. There, it's a board question in your NAFSAP. Actually, just the
We'll assume the rabbit thymoglobulin.
yes, it is. So there is this huge analysis has been done comparing rapid anti-thymocyte globulin to Glycemia and this to Campat both. What it showed that patients with Campat actually had more deaths, more infections. So Campat, that's why Campat is out. Okay, and Thymo was better than Glycemia in terms of graft outcomes. So that's why most of the highly sensitized and things like that, you move to a Thymo thing. Some places they use Similac for older patients, living donors who are non-sensitized at all, they use IL-2. Generally becoming more and more Thymo-based. Now, this is more used in which bone marrow transplants. A single dose knocks it off. So you do in any bone marrow transplant program you use, this is what they will use for induction. IL-2, you look at the studies of IL-2, in high-risk patients, the high rate of acute injections. That's why we don't use IL-2. Otherwise, like water, you can ask me why you use Thymo, it's like easy. 2 doses, you're done. Okay, you're finished. But that is just 25% to 30% of the patients on the limb, which is similar had steroid-resistant rejections. Look at the initial trials. New agents for induction, rituximab or bortezomib for B-cell induction, we use Velcade here. I happen to be a big proponent of B-cell induction because I think the driver for chronic rejection is antibody-mediated rejection, whether it's acute or subclinical or whatever variant. I think if you're sensitized, you gotta knock it off. You knock it off in the beginning, I think it sets the whole thing for the rest of the transplant's life. So I have their clinical trials which are supportive of it, both the rituximab, and then the other continuous of that. Complement inhibition, people have used that again for sensitized patients in the induction regimens. That has been used in certain applications there. The other ones are JAK inhibitors and IL-6 inhibitors, all investigational, maybe come in the future, those things. Peptides, oligosynth peptides, all the stuffs are coming in the future, not yet. Yeah. This is something, I can send you the slides. So remember the side effects of the polyclonals, okay, fever, headache, malaria, infection, PTLD. This is what they will ask you. The newest in the block, the last is belatacept. How does it work? Don't read out the slide. How does it work?
Just quickly read it.
Slides are just remind me that I talk about it. I don't talk off the slides. What is belatacept? Where does it work? What?
Signal too.
Signal? No, I want exactly where.
Go on, he said signal.
I know you are being. You're like an immunologist. You're like, so it works against the costoblique blockade, right? Okay. So B7-CD28, it works. How does it work this way? So it is an agonist to an antagonist. CTL4. That is an antagonist. So it's agonist to an antagonist will potentiate the antagonist. So remember, this is all, you have co-stimulation, it is positive co-stimulation, negative co-stimulation. You look at all the receptors, it's not just everything is positive, it's negative. So this is, when you look at the T cell gets activated for a signal 2 to happen, there's many of them start to happen. So this is one of the most prototypical ones. And belatacept will just knock it out and make you more energetic. So the reason why we came to it is we said, why don't, the rapamune didn't work, so we wanted something to displace calcium inhibitors. They came up with this molecule. They had these landmark studies, the benefit studies, then the extended benefit studies. Basically, the limb was cyclosporine, mycophenolate, prednisone versus belatacept, mycophenolate, prednisone. But they took non-sensitized patient, primary transplant patient, basically the good ones, okay? And they looked at it. Now I think that 12-year data, or 12-year data is available. It's now 10 plus 12 years almost since the inception of the trial. What does it show? The GFR is better, cardiovascular endpoints are better, although the rejection rates are a bit marginally higher, but they did not translate to that outcomes. So in the selected group of patients, Bela use is a better medication. Okay, what are the problems with Bela? CMV, EML, okay, those are the things you look at. Because JC virus infections and all. But generally, it's well tolerated. It's a monthly injection. There's no therapeutic drug monitoring. I think this is the future of immunosuppression is these kind of monoclonal antibodies which you can combine. You don't have to do any monitoring. The patient compliance is enforced. This is what it is. So more or less, I mean, we are not a big Bela center, but there are a lot of centers. I use Bela in my whole thing because it's part of all the clinical trials. I think we use for conversion. You talk about nephrotoxicity and CNI. I think in patients we should think about Bela. Even in patients who are African Americans or not, I think we can choose and do that. So I believe that a lot of centers are doing Bela for conversion also. So, and it got approved by FDA. It is the first medication in how many years? 20 years or something? It has really come a long while to get approved by FDA for it. So it's also a question of balance. That's where I think you have a job. You want to make sure that you don't have the side effects dominant, or this question of less immunosuppression you tend to reject, otherwise you tend to have these issues. That is all the side effects which you can take from immunosuppression. So this will help you in your notes. I think my fellows in Augusta used to always want this particular slide. Okay, of course. And, drug interactions. Let's talk about it. I don't know. So tell me the drug interactions with calcium inhibitors. Okay, tell me different kinds of drug interactions. First, how do you classify drug interactions basically? Of the metabolism, why to the liver, right? So there are other things. Okay, that's just one particular type of drug interactions. But there are other drug interactions which will affect absorption of the drug. Drug interactions which have got cardiovascular issues like QT prolongation. So drug interactions are multiple types, not just, we all just think about drug interactions as just levels up and down, but that's a multiplicity of drug interactions. So let's just talk about the CYP for it, okay? So what are the medications which are inhibited? Which means the levels are going to go up. Yes? What? Azoles, okay. So, good. So, group, azoles, all antifungals, diflucan, ketoconazole, all this stuff. In fact, in the olden days, when cyclosporine was being used and patients could not afford it, we used to put patients on ketoconazole for fungal prophylaxis so that they don't have to pay as much. And the dosage of cyclosporine used to be 25 twice a day. So, I've done that, and those days were there. So, yes, azoles. What else? What other antibiotics and anti-infectives can increase the levels? This is important. Macrolides, yeah. Erythromycin, doxycycline, Cipro, Levaquin not as much, clindamycin, they a lot. Even Zosyn and stuff, but these are the common anti-infectives. What about cardiovascular medications? I just tend to classify it. That's how I remember things. What type of calcium channels? Diazepam or Rapamune most. Okay. So Rapamune you got to remember. The one which will not cause obviously is diflucan and amlodipine. What are the cardiovascular medications? Do you use? Cholesterol medications. Yes, statins to some degree, yes. Yes, statins can. Amiodarone. Okay. Some of these medications are pregnant amio. And remember, amio also causes QT prolongation. Also remember QT prolongation. Now, when you're talking about anti-infectives, you guys left a very major group of anti-infectives, which may havoc with the CNS.
The antiviral.
Yes, very good. So, which antiretroviral medications will cause cholesterol? If you know which will, you don't have to worry about which won't. Or if you know which won't, you know which will. Either way, you get. These are board questions. Which ones? I know.
Yeah.
Which ones? These are board questions. These are all board questions, guys. In nephrology, not transplants. Nephrology board questions.
Say
Oh, the proteins, no, not proteins. And then proteins.
Is the one with the Z? Has a Z.
If we see, then we'll pick it up.
Come on, guys.
Just pick one.
So the one with the I. What's the one with the I? Come on.
It's an IR.
IR. Everything ends in IR. There is nothing which does not end in IR. Ritonavir. Very good.
Russia said that.
You gotta be loud, Russia.
Okay.
What else? You guys are Indanavir, Lopanavir.
Are
Anything
those
else?
proteins in this, or what group are they?
They are proteins. Not all of them. Some of them. So you have to pick. You cannot. There's no
Not all.
group of them. There is no group. Okay. You have to pick. You have to know which one. This one you have to know.
Okay.
If you don't know, this is a board. These are board questions. Okay. Anticonvulsants. Remember that. Dilantin. This thing. So also you have to know what will. Another common cardiovascular medication which you use all the time. I hate it, but I use it all the time. Warfarin. Okay, warfarin. Remember, these are the this is the ways you remember, right? Think anticonvulsants, anti-infectives, heart medications. If you don't know, check it out. But this is important. What does PPI do in terms of immunosuppression?
It's affect the absorption. Right?
Or what? You know it because every time you put an order, it tells you. You should know it. Cerner tells you this.
Oh, really? It does?
Yes, it does. Or all scripts, when you put it, it'll tell you this. Microfilm. Okay, decreases microfilm. Okay, so that's why you have to tell them when to kind of take it and all that stuff. Anything else with drug interactions?
With Lokelma, is there an interaction? Because Lokelma with a lot of
There are
medications.
no drug studies. Okay? So when people tell me that you can use safely in transplant, I tell them give them the evidence. Probably you can, but I don't think that studies yet to show that.
The anti-tuberculosis.
Yeah.
Rifampicin.
Rifampin, yeah, INH, rifampicin, those are things. When somebody comes to tacrolimus, what are the signs of tacrolimus or cyclosporine toxicity? This is again something which you do.
Tremors.
Okay, first tremors, what else? Next level,
I think it affect like the meditation, so it's confusion.
exactly. And if it gets even worse,
Coma.
seizures and coma. So when somebody comes, what's the high levels? Let's say sometimes you get these patients for levels of 40, 45, and you want to get them admitted, obviously. What do you do to bring the level down?
First of all, you
Dialyze, right? As a nephrologist, the first thing to say is sink a line in and dialyze, or you got to
Is
fistula dialyze. Right?
it on the list?
Huh?
You can do it and I think you take an anticonvulsant.
Which one?
Okay.
Dilantin. Because Dilantin, this is why you should know the drug interactions. Dilantin will bring down the level of tacrolimus Dilantin, and it will prevent it also from. So I think I'm going to stop with this, and this is the overview of this because you guys need to know that this is a very complicated. It just tells you all the sides of it, but also tells you that it's a complex thing. So you'll have to. That's why you need to work at different sides. That's why you have a regimen in place. How you choose a regimen, that's the thing which you did, I think we talked about. You have to realize, Dr. Paul alluded to this, you start off before making sure that they are antibodies, you need their cross-matches possible, desensitize them, if they are high risk, to the reduction regimens, and then you decide what is going to be your maintenance regimen. If you're a pediatric patient, probably tacrolimus and sirolimus. This is how we do it for each patient. For adults, tacrolimus is micro-friendly. unless there's some side issue. So you realize steroid plus steroids minus steroids. And then throughout the life of the transplant, as they get complications like infections or cancer, change it. If they reject, maybe your levels were low. Maybe you need to up the mycophenolate dose. So this is something, it's not just the beginning, throughout the life of the transplant. This is why we tell patients to come. And there are ways, are we doing only levels? No, I think your in vitro assays for T cell function and B cell function and you can do tolerance assays, that will help us target. But that's something, it works. We still don't have a great tolerance assay. We still don't have a test we can say, you got some commercially available tests, gamma ELISpot assays and also look at T cell. Nothing is really that good. Not yet. But that's where we are.
What about the patients who have rejection? Patients who have rejection end up on dialysis again, but they're on low dose.
Why do you think you keep them on it? Or somebody keeps them on it? Good question, very good question.
Pain and symptomatic, I guess.
But eventually you can get them off. Most patients you can get them off.
Do you target levels in those patients?
No, so what do I do? So this is a triple immunosuppression. The first thing I do is I ask them, the first question I ask them is there a potential for another transplant right away? So if there's a living donor transplant, my idea is this patients should go from that temporary dialysis and transplant. When you have a living donor which is the works, you want to keep your antibodies because you don't want the cross-match to become positive. I've had patients who have had it happen, and it does happen. I mean, it's very sad when you have potential donor, family member comes, the prior cross-match was negative, you take away the immunosuppression, the next cross-match becomes positive, and then you can't transplant them. So if they have something, then you need to be. So what do? Mycophenolate will keep both B and T cells low. So that definitely mycophenolate is something you need to keep them work for that. Definitely. Whether I don't use generally TAC, depends, maybe a low dose TAC because you want your kidney to have, some of them need the residual renal function, they're making some urine at that point in time, it's good on diet, so I keep them at a low level. Prednisone, I'll taper them off. If you've been a long-term prednisone, can't do cold turkey, they get adrenal insufficient. They feel like crap. They'll tell you this, okay? And they won't even, they'll have some pain, but more often they'll say, I feel like crap. So you have to put them a little bit. Otherwise, if they don't have a question about living donor transplant thing, I would stop the mycophenolate, slowly come down the TAC. In 3 months, I'll just get them off. No more than 3 months. But you got to get out the immune suppression.
So what do you worry about graft inflammation?
Graft inflammation, most patients should not. If you do this like
Slow
taper, but let's say you rejected the kidney and that's why you went on dialysis, and bad acute rejection. The immune system is still revved up. You've got to remember, people go on to dialysis because gently over 10 years, 20, 12 years, you lost your kidney, chronic rejection, you started. The immune system is not that revved up that now. It just died. Okay, your kidney died. That's all it did. This is, let's say, someone with ABMR, really bad ABMR. He went on dialysis or she went on dialysis. The immune system is still revved up. Just because your kidney is not clearing solute does not mean the process is not there. So if you go cold turkey there, you're going to have pain, inflammation, rupture. So that's where you need to be very careful. Those are the patients you need to be. At the same time, infection is there. It's for the lining and starting dialysis. It's a balance. You got to follow them. You don't stop following these patients as a transplant. So usually I follow them until I have cleared my immunosuppression away, and I say, hey, you guys can.
And then, if there is a hope for a second transplant, when would you ever take out the to avoid this sensitization?
What do you think I should do?
I mean, there you go.
I don't know. What do you think the data shows?
I don't know.
I'm sure that you are. I thought you read the data. And
No, I don't actually.
I think whatever you have something to say, Kasim, on that.
So yeah, I was gonna say that. What was the question?
Removal of the.
Yeah. So there is some data that if you remove the kidneys, actually, what will happen? What will happen if you remove the kidneys?
I mean, problem is.
So I'm having a lot. Let's say I'm 100% sensitized. I had a bad rejection. I have a kidney, and the surgeon now says, you don't need the kidney, you can make some money off it. Just go remove the kidney off. And I have a living donor in the works.
The problem is,
What will happen?
there's an increased risk of rejection in the second one.
Well, not just increased rejection, what else? What do you think?
It's surgical complication because they're overall.
What will happen to your DSAs? It may not.
go up because of the
Because,
bleeding and
no, the
cutting.
kidney is a sink. Remember, it's just a chemistry, the antigen antibody, right? So it's getting added forms complexes. The kidney is a huge sink for it. You take out the kidney, you're going to your DSCs are going to go up in the plastic. That's the theory behind it. And just go. The DSCs go up after you remove the kidney. And if the DSCs are going to go up and you're going to have a living donor transplant or some transplant later, your chance of rejection are higher, cross-match becoming positive is higher. Yeah.
But why should it go up?
That's why I'm saying the rejection process. DSCs go because the kidney is like a sink, right? Kidney is antigen.
Okay,
The antibodies are getting there. They're
Right.
getting complex.
right.
You no longer have a kidney. Your antigen is gone, your donor is gone, but you still have your antibodies.
It's working as a
It's just
sponge.
antibody that
It's working as a sponge for all these
It's a sponge.
antibodies.
Think about it as a sponge.
It's
Think about it.
absorbing all the antibodies from the.
Think about it as a sponge.
Okay, so if you remove it, there is nothing to,
There's no antigen to bind with the antibodies.
There's only antibodies present now, right?
so now, okay.
So
It's
you're
not
sorry.
attacking-
But this is a theory.
But they were still there.
No, but if the DSCs go, what?
If the antibody is there, it's there.
Yeah, but the kidney there keeps on
It's
binding it,
okay,
binding
so
it,
it's
right? So the thing is, the
controlling.
memory B cells are still there.
Okay.
It's being revved up. It keeps on making plasma cells and antibodies, i.e. DSAs. So that means that your DSAs are high, i.e. getting a kidney transplant and stuff like that is cross-match being positive and all the stuff is there. So the theory is, if you have your kidney, it will, and that is why in some antibody-mediated rejections, your DSAs can be negative. So one of the reasons in DSA negative antibody theories for DSA negative antibody-mediated rejection is the kidney acts as a sink, gets all the DSAs, so that's why the classification of DSA negative ABMR is there. That's the theory, at least the theory.
So there's a theory, I'm just asking, there's a theory saying that if you remove the kidney, you're gonna release antigen into the circulation?
No.
I'm asking.
No, there's no antigen release in that. Obviously something is going to, that
This
is,
is a three
no.
DNA and
No.
they
But
still
that's a very good thought.
So,
I mean,
but
transplant nephrectomy is a messy surgery.
it's
Yeah.
so something will be released, okay? Antigen is going, but
It's
it's
like
not,
delivery.
but it's not like they're going to, it's not like, I mean, it's not like that, okay? But the more thing is your antibodies, that's that data for it. Data for that is data. The AC is going up after transplant nephrectomy. That's you can Google.
So like what she says, it could be because of the release of,
From the surgery.
we only know that nephrectomy associated with increase in DSA. It doesn't say the kidney is the sink or, right?
All of those are theories. I mean,
No, this is not a theory. The DSA going up is
No,
not a
no,
theory.
I'm saying that the theory of the kidney acting as
No,
a
the
sink.
kidney actor sink, that is the sink. No, that we know. We know,
Really?
no, we know that the kidney, because you can very easily stain things and you can make it up. That's very easy.
So they looked at like
Yeah.
post-transplant
Yeah.
nephrectomies,
Animal study. You can do animal study. You can
This might
section
go on for a while.
animal kidneys. You can do that. That's very easy to do that. That's not difficult. And there are animal studies for doing that. I've done it. That's not difficult at all. What it is does it actually mean anything? The question you should ask is, does it mean anything in terms of more rejection?
Yes.
Does it mean that this patient is accepted?
leaving them on.
Yeah, leaving them,
Yeah.
yeah. So the question is not the DSA is going up, the question is that does it have any real significance, the ability of the patient to get a second transplant, the rejection rates in the second transplant. So there is a lot of publications on post-graft DSAs. It goes up, it should come down also. At a point, your memory B cells, let's say for a year, after a year and a half, it's only the immediate phase, right? It becomes quiescent. It just the antibody levels will go, you don't always stay high. That's it, you don't come down. You have an infection, IgM goes up, IgG goes up. After time, IgM goes down, IgG levels will go down. The memory cells are still there until the next
Till the next one.
but it's there. But your memory cells are always there. So the question is not what it means is the question. The question is not if it goes up DSA. If somebody asks you what question the DSAs will go, answers have to be yes, it will go. That's no
What does
question.
that mean for
What does
progress?
it mean? Now it depends. That's it. Yes.
Thank you.
I hope you like it.
Thanks for the slide.
Dr. Jack, what I took out of this is